Hey everybody, welcome back to another North Carolina Tar Heels basketball podcast, summer edition here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me is our director of basketball recruiting, the portal analyst, longtime college AAU and high school coach, Mr. David Sisk, who is on site at a camp he's running in Tennessee at a high school. So the Wi-Fi is not great. We've recorded 3 shows here during this stop here. So you're dealing with principal's office Wi-Fi during your break session at camp right now. So we're cramming them in. So David, we want to talk about the Tar Heels. We addressed recruiting in one. We did a drop. We talked about an interesting topic about recruiting as well. We're going to go straight into the 2024-25 Tar Heels, the work that Hubert did in the spring to bring in a couple of kids, to maintain the roster, why no one else came in, and then kind of what we think about the roster right now. So let's go first to your thoughts. We're going to hit on Cade Tyson very quickly, then Van Allen Lubin, and then sort of mesh this thing together a little bit.
Okay, so you want to start with Cade?
We'll start with Cade. Yeah, my bad.
Okay, fill the need. And if there's one shortage of the team originally that I would look at, and I guess as it meshes, people might look at the post play as obviously with Baycott being gone, they're afraid they're not as big. The more concern that I would have is how well do they shoot it. And they needed a guy like him. So, Trimble's three-point shooting was low. Cadeau's was low. Ian Jackson, I'm told he's a better shooter than what his outside shooter and what his percentages are, but they've been pretty low across the board throughout his high school and AAU career. So, you've got obviously R.J. Davis, a tremendous shooter, but who have you got around him? Because if you're going to go a little bit smaller and play in space, you've got to be able to shoot the ball because you've got to make the defense come out on you. I don't care how quick you are, how good you are. If I know, I don't care if you've got 5 guards on the floor. If you can't shoot the ball, I'm going to pack you in, and I'm not coming out of the lane. So you've got to have, and then the inner space is dead. So you've got to have somebody to make your outside shot. So Cormac Ryan, I thought filled a lot of needs last year. So Cade Tyson was the ultimate, I thought the perfect fit because, he's bigger wing at the 3 spot, and we'll get into that a little bit later where he's at. But I think his needs, if you just look at catch and shoot, spot up shooting, even coming off the ball screen with the ball in his hand, he's like up at the top, like in the 90s percentiles, close to 100. I thought him and Kobe Brea and Kirk Carissa were 3 of the best shooters in the country that were in the portal that were coming out of that. I mean, he to me, he was one of the 3 best shooters in the portal. And he also fills the need, like I said, at the size. So all of a sudden, something that you was worried about, he is a big factor in remedying that. Now, depending on how the post play goes, I think you give Jalen Washington the early shot. So I think early on, you're going to look and you're going to see Cade Tyson at the 3. You're going to see Van Allen Lubin at the 4. You're going to see Jalen Washington at the 5. And I think Hubert's going to try to make that go early on. But if it doesn't work to his satisfaction, I think you see Van Allen Lubin slide to the 5, and then you're going to see Cade Tyson go to the 4. And I really like that. So Tyson at the 4, man, he is really going to stretch some defenses. Now, he was recruited at the 3, and he was told early on that that's where they would play him at. But I think it comes so positionless. You don't want to be at a 4 if you got a back to the bucket guy. But if you've got a guy that's going to float around and play more out on the floor, man, there's really 4 and a 3. It's positionless basketball. So I could see it eventually going that way. And he's a huge, huge addition to this roster.
He told me that a lot of the other schools said that they were really looking at him as a 4, and he
Mm-hmm.
wants to have an opportunity to play 3 first. Now he said he'll
Yeah.
play some 4 at North Carolina because I think there's going to be because of the depth on the roster. Huber has a chance to be very multiple with what he does, but I also think that the way they're going to play, the 4 and the 3 are going to be sort of interchangeable at times,
Yeah.
maybe more so than before because Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan were very different players. But, here's the thing. People were worried about size and stuff like that. Cormac is 6'5". Harrison was 6'5.5". Oh, Tyson's legitimately 6'7". Now,
Mm-hmm.
if he's the 3 and he's replacing Cormac, you're longer there. He also led Belmont in rebounding, 6 rebounds a game. Cormac was 1 or 2 rebounds. He wasn't a rebounder. He was a feisty, mix-it-up guy, but he wasn't a rebounder. Tyson's a guy that rebounds on both ends of the floor. He can score on the offensive end with the offensive rebounds. So they elevate in that spot right there. And if you watch his film defensively, which I know you have, he's a good off the ball defender, but Hubert likes to switch. Some kids are terrible at switching, and they botched the whole process. He's very good at that because they switched at times at Belmont. And I thought he was very fluid with that. There were often times he switched onto a 6'2", 6'3" guy and was perfectly fine. Now, I know it was the Missouri Valley Conference, but that's a pretty good league. That's a league that's had a few teams hit the Final Four here in the last decade and a half or so. So I really like all those things that he brings in. Plus, he's rugged enough. He's got that edge. I think he can handle the 4 in certain stretches. I don't know if he's a 30-minute a game 4, David, but I think he can give you 15 or 20 at the 4 if necessary and play also at the 3. I think he can go back and forth.
Yeah, and Belmont's had a first-round draft pick here in the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was
It's a good program.
Similar spots. Yes. So
Van Allen Lubin is a guy. Go ahead.
You could. I was going to say now you could even play him, keep him at the 3, and play Jalen Withers at the 4. He's got some stretchability. So you hit the nail on the head when you said there is flexibility. It's a deep roster, it's a talented roster. There's flexibility.
If you have Lubin at the 5, Withers at the 4, and Tyson at the 3, that's the epitome of a back alley brawl trio that North Carolina hasn't often put 3 guys on the floor at the same time who will pull you into an alley and they'll be the ones walking out. Those are 3 tough dudes. And we saw last year what toughness does and how infectious toughness could be on a roster. They're not going to have that with Harrison Ingram. He's gone. But Withers played like that late in the year once he was finally comfortable. Tyson, I watched a lot of his film, David. He had to be separated. I thought he was going to get ejected one time. I asked him about it, and he says, I don't go looking for it, but I never back down from it. And then if you watch Lubin play, to have the kind of success he had against teams like Florida with all their bigs, you have to be a physical, rugged, not back down kind of guy. And he brings that to the floor as well. Those are underrated aspects of their games and what Carolina could have that will make up a little bit for maybe not having the length that a lot of people wish they had.
Ben Lubin, I would challenge anybody if you're worrying about him, go back and look at about his last 10 to 12 games. Just look at the numbers, and you'll see the difference. I mean, he's averaging I'll get the numbers wrong. Somebody will call me out on it, but he was his numbers were much. But he was coming off injury. In fact, he had 2 injuries. Yeah. So if you look at the last half of the year, his numbers in SEC as they went down the stretch were really, really good. And obviously he was playing out of position some. So we're talking about him playing at the 5, and he's not a true 5. But I just think North Carolina can stretch this thing a little bit more than what Vanderbilt was able to do. Jerry Stackhouse with great sets. He was a really good offensive coach, but he just wasn't. He had really quick guards who could get to the rim, smaller guards, but not the outside shooting threats of some of these. So he just didn't have the talent around him. They had to depend on him to do a lot because there just wasn't a lot of quality inside depth. You got to remember, he moved to the 5 because of injury. So, that was not first plan. Withers, the thing I worry about Withers is he'll do some good things, but, man, he'll make some bad plays that hurt you. And he got more playing time toward it. He had more playing time against Alabama. He had some plays down the stretch that I thought really hurt.
Yeah,
And
well, the shot, and he knew it afterward, and he had a tough time. I'm sorry to jump in, but a lot of people are going to talk about the shot, the three that he took in the last minute, and I was standing a foot and a half from him in the locker room afterward, and he couldn't even talk about it. He was so upset. He knew that he screwed up. And I think that's the good thing about him because he's very aware. And his father, who played at Charlotte back when Charlotte had a pretty good program, is very aware. They talk about the things that he doesn't do well, that he makes mistakes. He knows he has to tame his game some. And that's one of the points of emphasis this offseason. So if you could trim off some of the mess that flared up from time to time and have a player that's more fits into a box with all of the other stuff that he brings to the floor, suddenly you're looking at a far more efficient and consistent player. I think that's very intriguing. I think he's the kind of guy that if somebody steps up next year and plays way above what they were the previous year, he's a candidate. I think Jalen Washington's the best candidate for that, but I think Jalen Withers could be a guy that does that as well.
Well, Withers, the thing I was going to say, I hope he can learn from it because earlier in the year, I asked somebody about his playing time. He wasn't getting a whole lot. And he said he's got to get the Louisville out of it. And if you look at the year before and the last 2 years, Kenny Payne was absolutely a train wreck at Louisville. And so many bad habits and that all those players had. And it looked like a bad high school team. And so he had that in him and he had to get it out. And so it takes a while to, like we say, you want to create a habit, it takes 30 days and you've heard all that stuff and getting bad habits in and putting new habits in. Well, it's the same for basketball. So, he's had the whole off season and if he can learn from it, there's no doubt about his athleticism and talent. I mean, he gets stuff, from a post spot athletically that nobody else on that team could do. Yeah. So, if he can learn from that and just minimize the bad plays and the bad decisions, maximize just goodness. Don't play outside yourself. We're not asking you to get 20 and 10. Just make good, solid basketball plays. Then you're talking about a guy who can help.
And that brings us to Lubin. And I want to hit on Jalen Washington too, because when people think, man, they didn't bring in the 7-footer. Well, if you go back and look at the way the two Jalens played late, they block a lot of shots from the weak side, a lot of stuff. You don't have to just be the 7-foot guy who's a tree, Hunter Dickinson, and just have a hand in front of the rim and just swat everything. I think people have this notion that that's what they should have gotten out of the portal. I'm not saying that they wouldn't have been better off maybe getting someone like that. But what I'm saying is I think there's more there in the post that people realize. And it's not just one guy isolated. I think it's how they're going to play off of each other. Defensively, Lubin is very strong. He's got big, broad shoulders. He's a very strong hips and lower body. I think and we saw him do it against Florida. He could push those guys out a little bit. He can also score over big guys because he's an efficient game. He has a no stress game, David, and he has an ability to get guys on his hips and score. He's got a lot of moves around the basket. Plus, he can step away, so he forces defenders to constantly be aware that he can score. The other thing he does well is cut, and this is what I'm going to about working with the other two. I see so much high-low coming with these guys, especially Jalen Washington and Lubin, because they both have the ability to catch the ball and deliver the ball and go up quickly and score. I think what they're going to do in the post might be the kind of stuff that makes other teams that are huge go a little bit smaller to have to deal with it. And that will at times nullify some of the size advantages opponents have during stretches of games.
Well, they could have gotten, like you said, maybe a bigger player could swat shots like you were talking about, but it would have cost them, an Aaron Judge type contract. So with what they've got now, like you say, that's going to be the thing. It's going to be the fit. I don't doubt Ben Lubin's or Ben Lubin's ability of what he's going to be able to do, especially at the 4 spot. The jury's out because, and the reason I say this, you were talking about the high-low, the jury's going to be out on Jalen Washington. Yeah. And, if he can deliver at the 5 spot, he's had to have through injuries, he's played behind Baycott. Now he's not looking over his shoulders. I think Hubert Davis is giving him the keys and say, here, don't drive it into a ditch. And, he doesn't have to look over his shoulder right now for the next guy, because I don't think that there's a push from anybody that's coming back last year. I don't think from Zayden High or from James Brown coming in. I don't think there's a push there from one of those guys. If he doesn't make it, like I said, it's going to be a reshuffle of the roster, move the 4 to the 5 and the 3 to the 4. So the question on that high-low and how well they play together is, I think, got a lot to do with Jalen Washington. But like I said, I don't doubt Ben Lubin. Ben Lubin can play. I've got a very good friend of mine who's one of the smartest basketball people I know. It's a big Vanderbilt fan. And he was the first person I went to when they started kicking tires on Lubin. And he said he played out of position. That was the big thing that hurt him. He said, but I would advise anybody to go back to watch the Texas A&M game. Though unfortunately, it's not on YouTube, so I didn't get a chance to see that. But he said you can see the full package. He's got a lot to offer, but they got games out there. He had a couple: Arkansas, Florida, good teams. He had a good athletes that he's playing against. So he's playing against Con Mitchell in Arkansas, who's a stud, and had 20. So you can find plenty of evidence out there where he had good games against good opponents.
Staying on that as the trio, before I go more specifically to Jalen Washington, that trio, Jay Wash, Jay Witt, and Van Allen Lubin, they can all cut to the basket. So if you're talking about an open offense, and you're talking about the example you made about Dwight Howard, you don't have a guy on the block that sort of takes away driving lanes and opportunities. These 3 can move around. Lubin can shoot threes from the top of the key. Jalen Washington can't. Now, I know that Withers had a terrible year last year, but the year before he shot 41% from 3 he shot around 93s at Louisville and shot 41%. That's a pretty good number. These guys can all cut. They can move. They can move without the ball. And I think one of the important developments of Jalen Washington late in the season was a conversation I had with him in March about how he needed court time at the college level, which he hadn't really had, even in practice, because he didn't practice in the summer until last year, and he was then still dealing with overcoming the mental stuff with the injury, was learning how to cut in college and learning how to consistently be aware and ready for the ball and then receive the ball and score. If you look at most of his field goals late that weren't threes, they were cuts to the basket where he scored. He wasn't doing that early in the year. So if you have 3 guys that can hit threes and then cut to the basket, and oh, by the way, they're 6'8", 6'9", and 6'10", all with 7-foot or longer wingspans, that's not exactly a small team. And that's an attribute collectively they have that not every team they play is going to have. Other clubs are going to have to deal with that. And I keep bringing this up because everyone's so fixated on Carolina having to deal with Hunter Dickinson. Well, Hunter Dickinson is going to have to deal with that too.
Yeah, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a moment, because I agree with what you're saying if it pans out for Washington. Now, the staff believes it will. And I've talked to individuals who know them and have, privately know what they say and not publicly. And, they have all the faith in the world that it will. And those same things that you talked about, struggles that he's had, they see that as what's been detriment in the past. And that they, if they didn't think he would have made it, they wouldn't have recruited. So, like I said, they're going to go with that. And the ability to cut, if they have them, you're talking about more of the traditional North Carolina style that we've seen, all the middle ball screens, all the maybe 2 guys on the block, all the diagonal slice cut type of stuff that they run so much, the traditional sets with the traditional 4. we'll see more of that with Van Lubin at the 4 and Washington at the 5. So the cuts in that, Andrew, are totally different than the cuts that we're going to see now if we go small ball.
Yeah.
So Lubin goes to the 5, Tyson goes down. Now you're looking at something totally different. So, there's an adjustment. You can't, I don't know, and it'll be interesting. Hopefully they won't have to make a switch, but if they do, when do they do that? Because you don't want to do it 2 weeks before the postseason, and now you've flipped your whole offense. And I think it would make it probably simpler to read in football. If you go from a tight end and a fullback to 5 wideouts on week 9. How well do they adjust to it that late in the season? And man, it's like you're starting over. So, there's going to, it's going to take a lot. It's going to be like putting the jigsaw. The pieces are there, but there's going to be a lot of work putting it together.
I'm going to go back in time a little bit here. When I first started covering Carolina, it was the Antoine Jamison era. And back then, when media used to sit on the court side, at UNC, we had baseline seats. And I used to sit there along the baseline and marvel at how Antoine Jamison just constantly moved. And remember that lineup? You had Coda, you had Shammond Williams, Vince Carter, who was 6'5", maybe 6'5" in college, Ademola Okulaja, who was maybe 6'8", Jamison, who was 6'9". That wasn't exactly a massive team, and they were the best team in the country in 1998, went to back-to-back Final Fours. Okulaja and Jamison would constantly rotate on the block. They would go high sometimes and drop. They were constantly moving and replacing each other. And when we're talking about cutting and movement, that's a little bit what I started envisioning when you were talking about what Lubin and Jay Wash can do down low. Armando didn't do a whole lot of that, A, because a lot of the time he was the only guy down there, B, because they really didn't have another big that could sort of rotate with him except his second year, and that was a different kind of season. So I'm envisioning a lot of that because Jay Wash is quick, Lubin is efficient, and they both can catch and score. And they have moves down there. They have to be defended because they both have the ability to score. Jamison obviously was sensational. Okulaja was good enough at scoring, but I think with this group, you got to defend it. So they could cause a lot of trouble just by that movement in the lane that you're talking about, which is different than the open court cutting.
Yeah, and that's what they're working on right now. So, North Carolina's always been big about getting these guys in for the summer and getting them to play with each other. So, that's starting now. It's June. They got 5 months to the season starts, and then they've got another 9 months to the season's over. So they've got all this time to work together.
How much credit should Hubert Davis get for his work in the portal by keeping the roster? And I include Seth Trimble in that because he did step out, realized that he needed to come back and wanted to be back, and Hubert was a big part of that. How much credit should he get for maintaining the roster? Ultimately, the only guy they lost was a guy who played 40 minutes last year.
I'll give him a B. Look, there's no doubt that they wanted Clifford Omarui, and there were really a couple other guys, Adu Tiero and some others that did kind of set their sights on. But Omarui was the one that they would really like to have at the 5, and they didn't get him. And all these guys had circumstances around them and around their recruitments that kind of worked behind the scenes that didn't help. And some things changed in recruitment. There are just all kind of hoops you got to jump through, and things that you got to deal with when you get, especially in a portal. It's really tough recruiting because you're not building relationships. You're as they've always recruited. That's why Roy got out. He recruited the whole family, he recruited everybody around him, and he said, I just don't want to be somewhere where I'm recruiting a kid for a week And, they're wanting to know about money. It's NIL, so much of that stuff's involved. And so we basically, you bring somebody in and it's contractual negotiations. So, they didn't get that guy, whether it was no fault of their own, but, if they could have, you're talking about an A, but I would say a high B, because I still think they got two very good players in the portal. Kay Tyson's one of the absolute best ones in the portal. And like you said, they kept the roster intact. Go back, if you doubt that, go back to what you were thinking in March when you were like, man, we don't know if RJ, what are we going to do if RJ doesn't come back? RJ may not come back. I mean, we didn't know. It was probably a 50-50 crapshoot when the season was over whether he would do it. So, you've got one of the top recruiting classes in the country. You've got a good portal class coming in. You've got guys to stay. And when you look at the whole thing, they're in everybody's preseason top 10 next year, rightfully so. So, I mean, that's you were preseason, you've been preseason top 5 the last couple of years. And the one year you weren't, you made a run to the Final Four. Year 2 was a disaster, and they started out ranked number 1 at some spots. They were very highly ranked last year, won the ACC. They were a 1 seed. They're going to be very highly ranked. They're going to be in everybody's top 10. So, I know some people complain, maybe think there's a fall off. And I understand there's such a tradition at the University of North Carolina, but he's kept that program strong, and they're strong going into 24 and 25 again.
Last thing, what can he learn from the portal? Because there weren't as many misses as most people think. The Ballo and guys like that, that was never going to happen. You've reported on our premium board, which you can access for just $8.33 a month for 1 year subscription, which is a drop in the bucket, and the same price it was when I took over the site 10 years ago, August 1st. I'm almost 10 years in. You've laid out exactly the case, all these different recruitments, if you will, exactly what happened. They really only went after a handful of kids. Yeah. Didn't get a couple. They would have loved to have gotten Jonas Adu and then Omori, obviously. What is there that Hubert can learn from not getting those guys? Or is there anything to learn? Because he's a principled man. There's certain ways he's going to go about it. I don't think he's a cat that's going to bend real easily. But should he, or is there anything else he can learn from maybe not getting that piece that he originally sought out to get?
I don't think there's a whole lot to learn. I think the way he has developed his roster year in and year out, where he's got it right now, like I said, I think it's a model. I do a lot of radio stuff, obviously, for Rivals Network. I do some Kentucky stuff too. I do a lot of radio shows in Kentucky. And I'll tell them on there all the time. I'm like, look, and I was really talking about when Calipari was there, and I'd complained for a long time his teams were too young. But I've said this a lot in the last few months. Hubert Davis has got the model of what a roster build should look like in the year 2025. I mean, he's going to get 2 or 3 players out of high school. He's not going to over recruit where they're too young. And then you have guys that don't work out, and then it's just, it looks like his initial class. I think he has learned what his recruiting class needs to look like. Because, for example, you take this past weekend, they could reach out to 2026s for the first time. From everything that we've been able to, they reached out to 4. Everybody else a lot of others are reaching out to 20, 30 kids. North Carolina's like, they're not going to waste their time and fool around with a bunch. Well, I'm going to call this kid in wherever, West Virginia or wherever, when they have no intent of offering. And so you look at the 4 guys, they're all top 35 kids in the 2026 class. They are serious about all. Now, they've only offered 1, Cole Clower, but Kendra Harrison, serious about it. Latrell Allman, serious about it. Sam Bunches out of Mississippi, serious about it. So they're not spreading it out. So they'll bring in a couple. They're not going to offer 40 kids. And then, the guys to come back, that's the Carolina way. And then whatever they have left over that they need, they don't plug into spots. They go get very good players. I mean, Brady Manick, Harrison Ingram, have they struck out on some? Absolutely. Cormac Ryan. But they have brought some very, very good players in to fill even spots. And I feel like they've done the same thing again. So the thing, if there's something to learn, just keep doing what you're doing. Now, everybody may not agree with me, but I think in today's day and age, he has set up his rosters and lineups beautifully to what one needs to look like.
And very quickly, you mentioned Cormac Ryan. That was in addition to Manick and Ingram. You weren't saying Cormac is someone that didn't work out. And by the way, Hubert calls
Cormac was the one I was talking about that did. I know. Yeah. Later. Guys,
it was just where you placed his name.
Cormac Ryan, Brady Manick. Yeah, he's one of the guys.
Because of where you placed his name, I could see somebody on Twitter going
Right. Thank you for clearing it. Yeah. We don't.
Hubert calls it speed dating in the portal, and he still wants to try to get to know a kid. We saw, you had the photo that someone sent you in Kentucky of the whole staff having lunch with Tiero in Lexington. I mean, they still want to try to do a little bit more than speed dating. And sometimes if a kid comes in with a different approach, maybe a different handler in Chapel Hill than he originally had, that makes it legitimately speed dating and makes it very difficult to get to know him a little bit more. And that's the thing that I don't think he's ever going to change from. He's not going to just say, well, he's so damn good, let's just take him anyway. I just don't think that some of the things that people want him to do, he's going to do, because what you said, he's got to look out for the rest of the roster. But if he gets stuck with a guy like he had his first year when he abruptly, very quickly brought someone in very late in the process who ended up leaving the team the next year, he doesn't want to have to deal with that, because those kind of guys, while they may be real talented at times, the benefit that you reap from them is not as much as what their talent would suggest, because there are other issues. And there are guys out there like that. And he doesn't want to get caught in that kind of situation again. And so I agree with you. I don't think there really is anything to learn. I think he just keeps doing things his way, and he knows there are enough dudes out there that can help them win games that he'll find those guys. And I think he did with Tyson and Lubin. I'm not an apologist for Huber, and I'm not defending Hubert. I'm explaining this.
And he hasn't reshaped his program to bring guys into the portal. Yeah. So he's kept what he thinks North Carolina should be and bringing in guys to fit into that. He's not reshaped it. And look, not all of them do it. I was the guy who ran our program, Charlie Benson. I'll never forget it. He told an Indiana assistant, Ron Felling, who was ended up well known because of his incident with Bob Knight. He was the one that recruited Neil Reed and signed Neil Reed. And he told Ron when he signed him, he said, "You just signed a guy that'll cost you your job." So you got to be careful. I thought Tubby Smith, was one of the guys like Hubert, just a stand-up quality guy, brought in the right kind of kids. But he brought in one or two at Kentucky, and I'm like, what's he doing, man? He's getting ready to jeopardize his whole everything there, environment around the program that he's built and stood for, and he'll never get it back, and he never did get it back. And Hubert's not going that direction.
No, and he's not going to. He wears
I call it greedy. He's not gotten greedy. And you see it all the time in sport, not only just basketball, but football and things. And they'll have it going, and they just bring in one or two guys. I mean, Art Briles cost himself his career over them telling him, do not bring this guy in. And it cost him his career. A transfer. Do not, under any circumstances. have him to do anything with a program, and it cost him his career. So, look, you've got that. There's a lot of things to take into account. I think he's doing it the right way.
He has the DES pin on his lapel, and it's not for show. I mean, he swears by it. And he's trying to do things to uphold what that was. And most people listening that are Carolina fans understand what that is. And can you imagine DES in this era? I don't know. Probably struggle with some. He'd get a lot of criticism on Twitter too for not taking certain kids. But it's very interesting to watch how Hebert went about it this stretch, more so than any other, especially because there was more criticism and continues to be more criticism every time we run a basketball story or a podcast, whether it's on our Facebook page, on our message boards, or on Twitter. It's not very positive. It's just banging on Hebert because he didn't get the 7-footer. It's wild. And it'll be very interesting to see next year how this team shapes up. And I think they have a chance of being really, really good. They got good players 1 through 9 for sure, with Zayden High as a wild card at 10. And James Brown's a project. They've got really talented guys. I think they might have more talent 1 through 9 than they had a year ago, 1 through 10 than they had a year ago, for sure. We'll see if it works out. It's going to be a very, very interesting season. I'm still glad that we're in the off season, David. I got another 5 or so, 6 weeks before the ACC kickoff, but a big part of me is looking forward to seeing how football plays out without having a superstar quarterback, and with how basketball plays out with having a beast in the middle. It's going to be real interesting stuff. Any final words from you?
I'll be reading every word you write.
You always do, man. You're the guy. Every time I look up there, one view, and damn, Sisk is so committed. He's so loyal. He's the guy. All right, my friend, go back to camp. Go back to teaching some of those ball skills. Teach that pivot footwork today. He's David Sisk.
Oh, shoot, 83 pointers.
God, I would love to watch you coach a practice. I need to come out there and do that sometime. Because I'm a big practice guy. I love watching football practice, basketball practice. In 1997, I know I'm going off the reservation here, but in 97, I did cover 17 Orioles games, and I realized I couldn't do it because I'm a fan, and I just couldn't do it. But, in baseball, media is there 3-4 hours for a game because the clubhouse is open to the media. And I remember sitting in the Orioles dugout watching Jeff Rebele take infield grounders working on turning 2 from second base. And I just sat there watching that for like 20 minutes, marveling at it, because I love watching practice, whether it's football, basketball, or baseball. I told my wife we watched All the Right Moves. I told her my favorite scene is the practice when they're practicing submarining in a 4-point stance. I just love that kind of stuff. I'm a geek when it comes to that stuff. So I would love to watch a David Sisk coming off the ball screen drill. That would be cool. Thank you, my friend. Go have a great camp. We got 3 great videos from you this week, so hopefully people get their David Sisk fix in. He's David. I'm AJ. We'll see y'all later.